Hang on a second.
There
Let
you
me
go.
try this. Yeah, see.
So good evening. My name is Shirley McCormick, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Harrisburg Area. And we, in conjunction with the League of Women Voters of the Carlisle area, want to thank you all for joining us tonight and welcome you to this session. We think, obviously, a very important session for you to get information. I want to tell you that we are recording this session this evening, and we'll have it out on our website if you need to go back to it to double check something, or if you know of people who were unable to join us this evening and they would like to hear this, you think it was worthwhile enough for them to do that. I will send an email out to all of you when it is there, so you don't have to keep checking our website. I'll let you know when it is loaded there. However, if you have a concern about being part of a recording, you may want to get off now and you can go see the recording later. In the recording, information, questions in the chat room will show, your pictures will not show. So you don't have to be concerned about that if you wore your pajamas or something to the session. Nobody will know. So I needed to let you know that. And speaking of the chat room, if you have questions, the chat room, for those unfamiliar, on the bottom of your screen, you should see a word that says chat. And if you click on that, you're able to type in a question. And we will field them as we're going along if there are questions that you have. I want to turn it over for a little while to Bonnie Fowler, who is the president of the Carlisle League. Bonnie?
Thank you, Shirley. On behalf of the Carlisle Area League of Women Voters, I'd like to join in welcoming you to this evening's program. We're going to be discussing issues that are really important. Amending the state constitution is really serious business, but it's also frequently misunderstood. The process, the implications, even the alternatives. As an organization committed to protecting our democracy by promoting an informed electorate, we need to have a clear understanding of these issues, the processes, and the implications. And we have to be able to translate that understanding into action. So we're proud to help bring to you this evening information that's timely, it's reliable, and it's relevant to our work. And we thank you for choosing to be with us this evening.
Thank you, Bonnie. For those of you not familiar with the League of Women Voters, we're going to be celebrating a birthday on Sunday, February 14th, our 101st birthday. We were formed a few months before the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote. And our purpose was to help people get registered to vote, to understand how to do that, where to go to vote once you have registered, and then to encourage people once registered to actually go and vote. We do not support, nor do we oppose any political candidate nor any political party. That's not our point. Our point is to try and encourage people to become part of the democracy. It is a privilege we have to have this voice in government. So in addition to just actually getting them registered, we try to educate them, because we believe if you're going to be voting, you ought to know what you're doing. You ought to understand what the issues are, what's going to be on the ballot, who the candidates are, what they stand for. Are they agreeing with you? You like their positions, you don't like their positions, before you go into that booth and just check off names that you may not know anything about. We also do take positions on issues. The League does, in studies an issue, pros and cons, and then tries to get a consensus of our membership. And then we encourage our members to write to legislators, write letters to the editor in support of the position we take on an issue. And you will hear a little bit later this evening a position we have taken on an issue. So that's important for you to know about the League. We are privileged this evening to have Jean Handley with us. She will be speaking a little later in the program. She was born in Pittsburgh and has been a lifelong resident of Pennsylvania. She currently resides in Harrisburg, and she's been the Dauphin County coordinator for the nonpartisan all-volunteer coalition of Pennsylvania Citizens Fair Districts, Pennsylvania, since March of 2017. She is also a member of the Harrisburg chapter of AAUW, the American Association of University Women. She received her bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College, majoring in psychology, and a master's of education from Kutztown University, concentration in secondary school counseling. She then worked as a guidance counselor in middle and high schools. And I did not know this about you, Jean, a professional airline captain and ground instructor. We must talk about that at some point. That's fascinating. So we will be hearing from Jean in a little bit. What we're going to talk about first are 3 amendments that are going to be on the ballot in May. You may have heard about these amendments, but you may not have known that they're there, they're going to be on the ballot in May. So again, trying to educate people, we think it's important that you understand what they are and can make a decision of whether you're voting for them or you're voting against them. If you're not familiar how these amendments get onto the Constitution, that's probably because it's a really convoluted way to understand this. The legislature, the House and the Senate must pass by a simple majority a resolution that will become an amendment. And they have to pass that resolution in 2 successive legislative sessions. What is a legislative session? Just this past November, we elected the entire House of Representatives in Pennsylvania, and they started work in January of this year. They will serve 2021 and 2022. That's 2 years, and that is a legislative session, that 2-year service that they do. So if you have a resolution you want to be an amendment, you have to pass it in 1 2-year session. And then in another 2-year session, it has to be passed again. And it has to be passed exactly the way it was passed the first time. Change 1 word and you started the whole ball game over again. Very important piece on that. So these 3 amendments were passed last summer. What they then need to do is publish it in a newspaper in every county in Pennsylvania 90 days before the election. And even though they weren't going to be in the November ballot, they had to be published, and presumably they were in early August. But if you are like me, I had no idea that they were there. I thank the Carlisle League because they had a session in December where I learned that there were even amendments being considered. The idea is to let the public know, but we're in a kind of thing that not too many of us get actual pieces of paper, newspaper. We do an online kind of thing, and you may more easily skip over seeing that. So we feel it's important that we tell you about these 3 amendments. The other important thing to know about amendments, and I should finish the process. So after they did that, they had to come back this legislative session, because last summer was 2019-2020 legislative session. They had to come back in this session and pass those 3 again exactly as they were passed before. They did that. The Senate passed it in late January, and the House of Representatives just passed it last Friday, February 5th. So they now, again, have to be published in a newspaper in every one of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania before February 18th, because that would be 90 days before the May 18th primary. I'm pretty sure they're going to get there because there's been a lot of concern about publishing these things in the paper. The important thing to remember, because they're going to be on the ballot, Pennsylvania has what's called closed primaries. That means that you must be a registered Republican or a registered Democrat in order to vote in a primary in Pennsylvania. Purpose being you're picking the Republican and Democratic candidates that will appear on the November ballot. However, if there is a question on the ballot, and these amendments are questions, it is yes or no question on the amendments, then if you're an independent, if you're a Green Party, if you're a Libertarian, if you are any other registration, you can go to the polls and vote on these questions. You won't be voting on any candidates, but you are allowed to vote on the questions. If you're doing a mail-in ballot, you can request a mail-in ballot, and you should get a mail-in ballot of just the questions. So if you, friends, family, are registered in a non-Republican, non-Democratic party, please make sure that they know, because most times those people say, it's a primary, I'm not allowed to vote, and they aren't aware that this may be a year when they can vote. So second piece of information to make sure you know. So hopefully everybody's with us how the amendments happen. Now, everyone cross your fingers, because I'm going to try and share a screen. For those of you that know me, this is like a hold your breath, because, you know, may work, may not work. Oh, look at that. There it is. Except I'm not seeing me anymore. Do you all see me, or you don't see me? You see the document? No. Hold on. Wait, I'm back. I did it wrong. I apologize, because I could have sworn that I would do it wrong, and I did. Okay, now I'm going to do it right. Okay, is everybody seeing my document now?
We see amendments to PA Constitution.
Congratulations. Hopefully he wasn't the only one that sees it. So these are the three amendments that were passed last summer and then passed again just this past January, February. Number one, this is not the exact words that you will see, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the purpose of this is to limit the governor's disaster emergency declaration to 21 days. Currently, those declarations can last 90 days. This would allow the General Assembly to extend it beyond the 21 days when the 21 days have expired, but the governor would not be permitted to declare a new state of emergency for the same reason without the General Assembly's consent. Meaning, if they decided if 21 days happened and they didn't extend it, he couldn't wait 2 weeks and then proclaim the same declaration. That's what this amendment would do. This came about because last year, when the governor did declare for the pandemic his disaster emergency declaration, he did have it for 90 days. He extended it various times. And there are those legislators who felt that it was detrimental to the citizens of Pennsylvania that it was going so long, that it was hurting businesses, it was hurting people, employees. So they came up with this idea that 21 days. Not sure how they came up with 21 days. I've read various things that they have heard from businesses. I can go 3 weeks without it really being harmful to my business, and therefore 21 days. But that is what this amendment would do, limiting the governor's ability. And please don't read disaster emergency declaration to be pandemic. That is floods, hurricanes, tornado, whatever reason the governor would have for declaring a disaster emergency, he would now be limited to 21 days and could not extend it without asking the General Assembly to allow him to do that. So that's kind of the background on amendment number one. Amendment number two adds section 29 to Article 1 of our Constitution, and the exact wording is here in the quotations. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because of the race or ethnicity of the individual. This came about also last summer when there were a lot of protests, a lot of concerns and issues over people of certain races and ethnicities presumably being unfairly treated, not treated equally. There are, you may be aware, laws currently on Pennsylvania books. There is the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, which kind of says you can't discriminate against people. That hasn't stopped discrimination from happening, but the legislature felt that our Constitution had to also say this, regardless of other places where this is pronounced. The third is to clarify a constitutional provision to allow the legislative branch to terminate or extend a disaster declaration through a majority vote of both houses through a concurrent resolution that would not require the governor to sign off on that declaration. Currently now in the Constitution, it says that if the House and the Senate pass some kind of resolution, it goes to the governor's desk and he either signs it or he vetoes it. If he vetoes it, it can come back to the House and the Senate, and 2/3 majority of both of those houses can override his veto. This would eliminate that. They could pass this resolution terminating his declaration or extending it, and he had no say in it. They could just do that. This came about because they tried to do this last summer. They tried to pass a resolution ending his pandemic disaster emergency declaration. Again, the Constitution would require him to sign off on it, and they would have to override his veto if he vetoed it. It actually ended up in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they said, no, legislature, the Constitution doesn't allow you to do that. And therefore, they could not end his disaster declaration. So they now are attempting to change the Constitution in Pennsylvania to allow them to do this. So I have a suggested website for you, and it's called Ballotpedia.org, if any of you are familiar with it. If you go to that website, on the left side of the screen that appears, you're going to choose the 2021 elections, obviously, and a drop-down menu will come, and on that list, there is ballot measures. You click on that, and the next screen you get, you just scroll down to May 18th, which is our primary election day. And you can view each amendment separately. They're listed there. You can click on each one. And what I've done to give you a kind of an example is copied what was the third amendment up there, the one that allows the legislators to extend or terminate the emergency declaration. Obviously, our seal, when our election date is, the topic is a state legislature measure. It's on the ballot. It's a constitutional amendment. The first thing they show you is if you vote yes, here's what it means. If you vote no, here's what it means. May seem kind of simple, but with apologies to any attorneys that are listening in, sometimes the way this is written, you're not quite sure, do I agree with that or don't I agree with that? For instance, if someone would say to you, simple yes or no question, have you stopped beating your wife? Well, let's think about that. If I say yes, that kind of implies that at one point I did beat her, but I have stopped. But of course, if I say no, that means I'm still beating her. So they're attempting here to help you understand if I vote yes or if I vote no, what you are voting. They do give you a little overview, kind of what I said about what is happening here. And then they show you the actual amendment. This is to Article 3 of the Constitution. And the underlined portion is what they're adding, and the struck through portion of the text is something they're taking out. So what I want you to do is look at this amendment without reading the underlined part. And originally the amendment said, every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of both houses may be necessary. Then jump down, shall be presented to the governor, and before it shall take effect, be approved by him, or being disapproved, shall be repassed by 2/3 of both houses, according to the rules and limitations presented in case of a bill. So that's what it said, had to go to the governor. Now what they have done is inserted all these resolutions and orders, except they just added an S to questions on adjournment, except the termination or extension of a disaster emergency declaration as declared by an executive order or proclamation, or a portion of a disaster emergency declaration as declared by an executive order or proclamation. So they've now inserted an exception to sending things to the governor for his signature, again, because they felt that they needed to have control over this. I did not copy any more from Ballotpedia, but what follows after the actual amendment is pros and cons. They will, in the pros, list comments from people or rationale from people of why they are for this amendment, and then they will have cons, rationale from people of why they are opposed to this amendment. So I highly recommend that you look at that, because sometimes you may think, yeah, I'm going to vote for that, and then you read the pros and the cons and you're saying, well, no, I'm not going to vote for that. So it's good information to kind of give you a perspective. Following those pros and cons, they show you the actual vote in the House and the Senate, the vote that happened last summer, and the vote that just happened now in the two various sessions of the legislature. So Ballotpedia is, in my opinion anyway, certainly a place to go to get information to help you understand these three amendments to the Constitution. I talked about why they appear to be there, why people feel that these are very important. People that are not very happy about these feel that it is taking away the balance of power. You've always heard about checks and balances between the three branches of the government, and they feel giving this much power to the legislature is harmful to that balance of power. You'll see other pros and cons for this particular amendment, but these particular amendments. But what is important is, one, that you are aware they're going to be there on the ballot. Two, you look at them and you determine which side of the fence, the yes side or the no side of the fence you're on, so that you are prepared to go in. There seems to be a tendency for us for the population to see an amendment on the ballot and just kind of automatically vote yes, because what came from the legislature, and you know, they understand this stuff probably better than me, and so there just tends to be a yes kind of thing. We're just asking you, if you want to vote yes, that's fine, but to understand this, to pass this word along to people so that they know the amendments are going to be there. I have walked into a voting booth and there was a question that I didn't even know was going to be on the ballot, and on top of that, I really couldn't understand what it said, so I should have prepared myself better, but wasn't aware that that was going to happen. So we're hoping that this informs you, lets you know about this, and you will tell your friends who are independents, Green Party, whatever they are, that they can vote and they should vote because there are questions on the ballot. May, do you want to say something? Did I miss?
I would like to ask a question on behalf of a question that came through the chat.
Okay.
And then I wanted to bring up another point that I think you and I discussed earlier, Shirley.
Okay. Okay.
The question is this amendment still requiring a 2/3 vote to override the governor's veto?
No, they are not. No.
Right.
Because that's what changes in that third amendment we talked about. They said everything else he can veto, except if we decide to end the declaration. It doesn't even go to him. It just ends.
Right. So any of these amendments that pass are not subject or get turned down are not subject to the governor's veto. He doesn't have a say in this at all. Now the question.
I failed to mention that when they do resolutions to become amendments, the governor has no say in that. We, the people, have a say in whether they become amendments or not.
Right.
Yes. Nay.
The question I wanted to ask was, aren't the second and the third amendments tied together in some way, that so when you vote for one, you vote for the other?
I tried to get clarification on that because I had heard similar kind of language. I think at the Carlisle presentation, she had talked about that. What I do know happened was the two that dealt with disaster declarations were in Senate Bill 1166 last summer. And they were just there, and that's what people were to vote on until a member of the Senate said, I want to amend it, and I want to amend it by putting in this piece about equality. And then it became 3 resolutions in that Senate bill. And then if you wanted to vote for equality, you had to vote for the other 2. So that kind of may have been problematic for the legislature. But I have heard, and I tried to, if you're a member of the Carlisle League and you were at their presentation in December, they had a professor from Dickinson speak about these 3 plus the 4th that we're going to talk about in a second, amendments, and she indicated that. But I tried to find any kind of research that the second and third one on my list are tied together and you can only vote for the 2 together. And I'm not seeing that, but that doesn't mean that it may not happen. And the bottom line on that kind of thing is, should that be the case, that you can only vote on those 2 together when you go to the polls and you don't want to vote yes for both of them, or you don't want to vote no for both of them, the understanding is that should they pass jointly like that, there's going to be litigation against it because that's against our Constitution. You can't have 2 different subjects on one vote like that. So at this juncture, I'm not finding anything that says they're going to be tied, but that's something that if we find between now and May, we're going to post information out that is there, and you need to be aware of that when you go to the polls. But right now, I'm not aware that that's true. Doesn't mean that it isn't true, but we'll look for further information.
Very good. Thank you.
Were there more questions or not? No?
I'm not seeing any in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Then not having any further questions there, I introduce you to Jean Handley, and I'm going to turn the program over to her now. Jean, take it.
Okay. Good evening, League of Women Voters members and guests and friends. And I want to thank you very much. By the way, Shirley, that was an excellent presentation, and I learned quite a bit from that. But I'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening. And I especially want to thank Shirley McCormick and Mazia and Bonnie Fowler for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you this evening about another important issue that could be a constitutional amendment. As Shirley said, I am from Fair Districts, PA, which we are a child of League of Women Voters. And we have been advocating for redistricting reform, as you probably well know, for about the last 4+ years, and primarily for an independent citizens commission. And in that journey, we have found some other things that contribute to the dysfunction in our legislature. And I'm gonna put my screen share up here, and hopefully we can get that going. And so my program usually is called Dysfunction by Design, and it talks about gerrymandering and procedural rules in appellate judicial districts, or the potential for that to happen. Because these are 3 of the areas that we have noticed that are contributing to the dysfunction. Now, I will be focusing on judicial districting tonight, but you may hear some other things creep in here about our efforts for redistricting, and also a little bit about the rules, because it gives you a little bit more context for what is happening with this particular potential amendment for judicial districting. All 3 of them are kind of tied together with a common theme about power and control, and then sometimes money. Once again, that's kind of a contributing factor to a lot of the dysfunction and why things don't get done in our capital. So on that note, let's get started, because there's an awful lot to cover. And judicial districting, my main focus tonight. And I am not apologetic about this. We have taken the position at Fair Districts, along with a lot of other supporting organizations, that says this is not a good idea, just say no. And just to review real quick, because Shirley did an absolutely fabulous job on this thing. The bill with the exact same text must pass both houses in 2 successive legislative sessions, as she mentioned. Really important, I will re-emphasize this, there is no ability for a governor to veto any of this. And it will be placed on the next statewide election for a vote for public referendum. And just to give you a little bit of context, and this is where my little gerrymandering comes in, these were, this gives you a little bit of context of how things work, and how bills pass or don't go or whatever. In the last 2 legislative sessions, you can see that these were the bills that we supported that were for redistricting reform. And some of them required constitutional amendments, some did not. They ran out the constitutional amendment clock on these bills. And so then in June and July, 2 new bills were introduced last June and July, HB 2638 and SB 1242. And those bills were keeping the same processes for redistricting for congressional and state legislative districting in place, but it imposed strict criteria for map drawing and transparency and public input and those kinds of things. And it will be coming back again shortly in this session. And I will be happy to come back and talk more about that at another time, but I just wanted to mention it. And one of the things that's a real source of frustration about our bills, like I said, some required constitutional amendments, was that we had more bipartisan co-sponsors, more bipartisan sponsors, and they were more co-sponsors, and they were bipartisan than any others in the House in the last 2 sessions for a couple of those bills. And the resolutions of support were from 24 counties and over 360 municipalities. We had petition signatures, we had letters to the editor and op-eds across the state. We had public meetings and talked to thousands of people. And then there was the F&M poll done in 2019, where they found that 67% of Pennsylvania citizens supported reform. And the reason I show you this is because none of this mattered. Absolutely none of this. There was broad legislative support from the rank and file, and there was broad public support. None of these bills were ever given a final vote. Now, I don't need to tell you too much about gerrymandering, at least at this point, because you all have a pretty good handle on that. But I do want to run over here, and this is one of the things that is a potential negative consequence for partisan gerrymandering or partisan redistricting, and it's unfair procedural rules. And what I mean by that and how that fits in is that every 10 years they redraw the congressional and the state legislative maps, and for those maps, the leaders, the party leaders, and primarily the majority party leaders draw the districts, especially in the state legislative districts. And then those districts in many cases are distorted, and they are drawn to protect incumbents and also to get more people seats from their party. And as those people gain seniority, those incumbents gain seniority, they get more power, they get chairmanships of committees, they get speakerships, or they are very very powerful in the caucus, and they control the rules. And every new session, as Shirley described the new sessions, every new session on the very first day, one of the first things, if not the first thing, is that they vote on procedural rules that will govern them for that entire session in the House, and also they do the same thing in the Senate. And those procedural rules are designed in many cases to promote the majority party's agenda, to minimize or marginalize the minority party, and also to control the legislative agenda. And in many cases, you can break that down even further and say that they're promoting the party leader's agenda. And it is there to kind of block collaborative legislation between the two parties. And then you start it all over again. And so that's how it kind of fits in with some of the gerrymandering, and how it actually kind of ties in with the next thing, why you see a lot of the things that you care about don't move. And the rules govern the process. The majority party makes the rules. The rules give party leaders control, and the leaders and the committee chairs, their power far outweighs anything that either the people want, as you could see in my description of what happened with our bills, and also the rank and file legislators in many cases. And once again, you can see that with the bills that we supported, because we had more co-sponsors and they were bipartisan than any other of some of the bills in the House and the Senate for legislative sessions. And so this unchecked power controls a real dangerous imbalance. And the current rules, basically the game's fixed. The Speaker of the House, or the President pro tempore, appoints the chairs of the committees. And the chair controls the agenda of those committees. And the chair decides if a bill gets a hearing or a vote. And the chair can send it to another committee to die, or they can say, okay, we're going to send this over there so we don't have to really take responsibility for this. And then the Speaker or the pro temp of the Senate, or the majority leaders in either house, or the chair can block a vote, no matter how popular it is with legislators or the public. One person can block a vote, and they do not need a reason to do it. I mean, there's no rationale, and they don't have to give a reason to do that. And the bills in one chamber that are passed can be denied a vote by a majority leader in the other chamber. So this is kind of how bills move or don't move. And so do we have a representative democracy or one party rule? Well, 85% we found in the last few sessions of successful bills in Pennsylvania are introduced by the majority party. And so the majority party picks the committee chairs, and then the committee chairs advance the partisan agenda. And understand that right now, yes, the Republicans happen to be in majority, but the Democrats are prone to do the same thing. This is a power kind of thing. So I'm not picking on the Republicans at all here. It is a problem that is on both parties. Now, that takes us to the bill. House Bill 196, which was what the bill was called last year for judicial districting, snowballed, as opposed to the bills we had about redistricting. This thing snowballed through, and it was introduced in January of 2019 into the House, and it was voted out of the House Judiciary Committee on April 30th of 2019. And there is no transcript that we could find about what happened in that meeting, what was said, what the discussion was or anything. So we don't know, we can't find that transcript. It passed the House in December of 2019. It was then sent to the Senate and went to the Senate State Government Committee. And they took it up on July the 13th of 2020. They spent exactly 9 minutes talking about the bill before they took a vote. And they passed the Senate, the total Senate, went to the floor after it passed in the committee. And it was passed in the Senate in July 15th. It took 3 days for passage in the committee for first consideration, second consideration, third consideration, and final vote. So it was rushed through at that point. There was no expert testimony. There were no hearings. There was no public input for this. And this is a constitutional amendment. It is important, and those kinds of things need to happen, or should happen anyway. The total time spent on this judicial constitutional amendment in any public setting was less than 1 hour, whether it was the House or the Senate or whatever. And there was bipartisan opposition to this. In the House, on the final floor vote, there were 4 Republicans that voted against it, and then all the Democrats voted against it. So, and in the Senate, there was 3 that voted against it, 2 of which were Republicans, and 1 was an independent, and then all of the Democrats voted against it. And so what is the purpose of this bill? Well, what is the stated purpose of it anyway? And notice now it is called HB 38. As Shirley said, this is the second iteration of it. It's the second time through, and it's now got HB 38 as its number. Same bill. It amends the Pennsylvania Constitution. It's supposed to, or their stated purpose is organizing the judiciary into representative districts and further providing for residency requirements. The prime sponsor of the bill gives as some of the rationale for this, that there are different philosophies on how to apply the law based on how and where you grew up. That was a statement from him. And I think there's a lot of people that would say, really, to that, because that is not the understanding of what judges are supposed to do. They are supposed to interpret the Constitution. They are supposed to interpret the laws and pass rulings, and they apply to everyone in the state of, for the appellate districts, which is what this is addressing. They apply to all of us. It is not based on how or where you grew up, and they are not representing a particular constituency. So that was one thing. Some other reasons are this reduces the influence of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And so the question is, what exactly is the influence of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia? Do they mean political party influence? Is it because the urban areas seem to lean more Democratic and the rural areas are more Republican? What do they really mean by that? And don't judges that live in other areas of the Commonwealth have an opportunity to run for judgeships? And the answer is yes, they do. They are statewide elections. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this regional thing in a few minutes, but I just want to bring up those kind of questions to think about. And then another thing is well, this will help root out judicial corruption. And okay, I guess you can look back and say there has been some judicial corruption from both parties and throughout the decades. But are they saying that judges that live in or are from Philadelphia or Pittsburgh more corrupt than judges that come from other parts of the state? Or, and he cites, and I will read this, of the most recent 7 appellate court judges convicted or accused of serious crimes, 4 of them were from Allegheny or Philadelphia. Well, okay, there were 7. And if this is in fact true, 4 from Allegheny and Philadelphia, well, 3 were from other areas. So, you know, I'm not real sure what they're getting at here. Bottom line is we need to step back for a second and take a look at our court system in Pennsylvania. And so the courts of limited jurisdiction are here at the bottom, or we can call them the minor courts. And you can see the number of judges in here. They're the magisterial district courts, the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh municipal courts. And these judges are elected very locally. So if you are concerned, if someone is concerned about having a regional input or flavor at the lower court level, that is you could consider that there probably. Then you move to the next level and you have the Court of Common Pleas, and these are elected in 60 regional districts around the Commonwealth. And once again, if you're thinking about regional input, well, okay, there you have it with 451 judges. And then you get to the higher courts or the appellate court system. And there are 31 judges in our appellate state system. And these are statewide elections. They are on a statewide basis. You can see that there are 7 Supreme Court justices, 15 Superior, and 9 Commonwealth Court justices. At the present time, these are what the numbers are. 7 is always the Supreme Court by the Constitution. And the Superior Court, the purpose of the Superior Court is that they handle appeals in criminal and civil cases from the Courts of Common Pleas. And they generally decide cases in 3 judge panels, and they meet in either Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, or Harrisburg. And then the Commonwealth Court handles original civil actions brought by and against the Commonwealth and appeals from state agency decisions. And they also meet in 3 judge panels in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, or Harrisburg. And then you have the Supreme Court, which is over all of them. They handle anything that comes up from these other appellate courts. And they meet as a 7-judge panel all the time in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Harrisburg. That's just where the venues are. And understand that this concept of judicial districting is not a new concept. They have been trying to do this, meaning the legislature has been trying to do this since 1989. And it did have, it passed out of committee in the Senate in that year, but it did not pass the Senate. And so nothing happened. And then you can see where it was introduced again over the years with nothing. It was not an issue. It didn't do anything. And then more recently, you have the 13-14 session where Garth Everett introduced it. 15 and 16, Russ Diamond picked up the mantle here, and 17 and 18. And it went nowhere, okay? And then I'm gonna just mention this again, because here's my gerrymandering redistricting again. This was a bill that we were in support of. They amended it. It wasn't the greatest, but at least it got to the Senate, and they were gonna vote on it at the very last minute. Senator Ryan put his amendment on, and it was this bill, these bills for judicial districts, and they amended it, and then it passed the Senate, and it went over to the House, and the House put over 400 amendments on it and basically killed the bill because it was a poison pill. This Almond amendment was just, it was not acceptable. And so then nothing has happened here. And all of a sudden in 1920, 196 passes. And now we're in 2021, 22, and HB 38 is in the legislature. What is some of the specifics of this bill? The judicial districts, the General Assembly will establish these by law. And the compact, contiguous, nearly equal in population, that's one of the requirements of it, that a district would do that. No unnecessary splits of counties, cities, incorporated towns, etc. And if you are aware of how they do the legislative redistricting, those are requirements for the legislative redistricting too. So they put it in here. Another thing is that they're going to redraw these every 10 years after the census. And the question becomes, how much of an upheaval will this be if they redraw the districts every 10 years and you have judges in those districts? And then there is a 1-year residency requirement. I want to go back and just mention about Russ Diamond's statement about there is a way that you look at the law based on where you were born and where you were raised. I'm paraphrasing there, but this seems to fly kind of in the face of that, because if you really wanted to run for a judgeship, you could move to a place for 1 year and then you would be qualified to run. So not real sure what's going on there. And then the last thing here is the General Assembly establishes by law the transition to appellate districts and how they're going to do this transition from statewide to appellate districts. Who would draw the judicial districts? Well, remember I said it's going to be established by law, but here it is. The legislative leaders and the staff. And it's the same partisan behind the scenes team that brought us the ever popular goofy kicking Donald, the old Congressional District 7. And there are no safeguards against partisan gerrymandering with these districts. The co-equal branches of government. This is another argument. You have the executive, we have 3 co-equal branches of government. You have the executive branch, the legislative branch. The executive branch enforces the law. The legislative branch creates state statutes. And then you have our judicial branch over here, and they interpret the law. These 2 branches are responsible to constituents. This branch should not be responsible to constituents. It is responsible to the law and the Constitution. And so what would happen is if they pass this, the legislative branch is going to take a much greater hand in this. And you're going to upset the co-equal branches of government, basically, because the judicial branch could be very beholden, or some could be very beholden, to the legislative branch who is drawing their districts. And when it comes retention time, you know, is that going to influence how they rule? Are they going to look at what might be who's drawing the districts, the majority party at the time, and what their agenda is? Don't know, but the potential is there. And then if you notice, the executive branch is still higher than the judicial branch too. And that goes back to if they pass these judicial districts, the governor will have the ability, just like he or she does with the congressional districts, because it's going to be the congressional district process, to veto that. And then it would have to be go back and be reworked, or they could override with a 2/3 majority. But even the executive branch, because of that, could cause the judicial branch to be somewhat beholden to that. So the bottom line is, and I go back and I say, it is a real potential to upset the 3 co-equal branches of government with this. How many other states do this? Well, none. There are 41 states that have nonpartisan judicial elections or merit-based selection process. And I believe there's 28 that have the merit-based selection. A vast majority of them do, and more are going to that. 9 states that have partisan elections for appellate courts. They're either primaries, generals, or both. And then there's only 2 states of those, Illinois and Louisiana, that have partisan regional or district, if you will, elections for appellate courts. But those lines don't get redrawn after each census. Louisiana, the last time they drew the lines was when they made the law, and that was in 2000. And in Illinois, they have not redrawn the lines since 1963. So with this amendment, potential amendment, the PA legislature is proposing an all new form of gerrymandering in a new historic low, potentially. Now, some legislators say this would provide for greater diversity of our appellate courts. Okay, we're getting to this diversity argument and regional argument. And okay, well, so what do you mean by diversity? And if you're talking about political party diversity, where the parties that these judges belong to. Not really. They're the current composition of our appellate courts. By the way, there are 31 positions, 30 are filled right now. There's one vacancy. But there's 16 Republicans and 14 Democrats and one vacancy. So if it's not that, is it gender? And you look at that, and 3 of the 7 Supreme Court, 11 of the Superior, and 6 of the 9 Commonwealth Court judges are women. So unless the men are upset, it's not that. Is it racial diversity? There's almost no racial diversity in our appellate system. There's one African-American woman and no men of color, but this is not going to do anything, or would do little to fix that. And there are other ways to do that, whether it be merit selection or whatever. So that brings us to, they will say, okay, well, it's not that, it's regional diversity. Now, as far as the regional diversity, Russ Diamond has said that I believe it is roughly like 54.8% of the appellate judges are from Allegheny and Philadelphia County. And so, and that does not reflect the population of our Commonwealth. But what he did when he did his math and his statistics was he looked at where they ran from, where they lived when they ran for their appellate judgeship, and did not take into consideration where they grew up, where they went to school, where they were born, other ties that they have to the Commonwealth. So if you look at all of those things, the Pennsylvania judges are from all parts of the Commonwealth. And basically, we have some statistics over here, and you can see the state population in Philadelphia and Allegheny, and then the rest of the Commonwealth, and then the appellate judges. Well, I'm going to even change these stats a little bit more, because when you take into consideration where they were born, raised, etc., there are 20 of the 30 present appellate court judges that were born or lived in other counties of the Commonwealth or other places. And then if you throw in where they went to college and law school, there's 25 of the 30. And so this statistic right here probably would go to about, maybe 20 or 25. And this would go up to about 75 or 80%. And I think that Emily Kincade, she's a newly elected representative. She is a young lawyer. She is on the Judiciary Committee, and she was in the meeting where they voted on this. Says it probably better than anybody could have said. And this is what she said in the meeting. She said, lawyers come from all across our state and all across our country, and they study in our law schools, which are in Philadelphia and they're in Pittsburgh. They are in areas that are in higher density than Representative Diamond believes do not represent the geographic diversity of our entire state. The jobs and the experience are in areas that are like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Your legal experience has greater diversity. You see more complex cases, and so these areas draw lawyers from other areas of the state to practice in the courts in these areas. And she makes the case that it doesn't matter where you lived at the time that you ran for your judgeship. There is a whole background of experience that contributes to your thinking, or your judicial, I guess I want to say philosophy, but your experience means something. Some legislators say, well, okay, we just want the people of Pennsylvania to decide. We wanted to go to referendum. And this is interesting because we certainly would have liked for our redistricting bills that required constitutional amendments, we would have liked to have had them decide on the issue of independent redistricting. We made that clear in every way. And with all the support that we had, but these same people, the same legislators who say, let's let the people decide on judicial districts, blocked every chance that they could to allow a vote either in the legislature or in on a referendum for redistricting. And so it's kind of like, well, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth here. HB 19638 leaves some key questions unanswered. What is the specific process and used for drawing districts? What are some of the intricacies of it? How would the transition be handled? What happens when judges from the same court end up in the same district? Can legislators decide which judges can continue in a district and which can't? Can the number of judges change, and if so, why and by whom? Can legislators use this bill to remove or punish individual justices for decisions they don't like? And most of these questions are usually answered by what they call enabling legislation or supporting legislation. And there are other questions that can come from this also. But to date, so far, no enabling legislation has been written that we know of to help answer these questions. And so how can you vote for something and be an informed voter as a legislator or as a voter if you don't know how it's going to be implemented? You just are voting kind of on faith. Who decides the movement of these bills? Well, remember I talked about rules. Is it the committee chairs? Is it the majority leaders? Is it the House Speaker? Is it the Senate pro temp? It's all done behind closed doors. And so basically the accountability and the transparency, where is it? The bill is written, and these are key points. If you take nothing else away from this, these are some of the key points that you might want to consider. It takes away a fundamental right of the vote. Right now, we can vote for all 31 of our appellate court justices because they are statewide. So every one of us gets a chance to vote for that. If they do this, you will only be able to vote for 3, 1 superior, 1 supreme, and 1 commonwealth court justice. And once again, I kind of pose this rhetorical question. If you had a case or had someone that you knew had a case in front of the appellate courts, would you rather have had the opportunity to vote for all of the justices that might be on that case, or just 3? 1, actually, 1 case, because it would be in front of one court at the time. It subjects the appellate courts to undue influence by the General Assembly. It allows legislative leaders to gerrymander potentially these judicial districts and put in there who they would, put the voters in that will vote in their candidate. Undermine the American system of checks and balances, which we've described. It will emphasize a judge's location over a judge's qualifications. So you may not get the most qualified people if you're picking just from districts. And then this is one we haven't really talked about, but special interest money and power might influence the rulings. And this has happened in a case in Illinois where State Farm had put a whole bunch of money into one of the, I think it was a Supreme Court justice campaign. And there was a court case that involved State Farm that was coming up before the court, and he won. And the question becomes, is that going to happen with this? And there is so much money put into the judicial elections. Our 2015 judicial appellate elections, the Supreme Court elections, probably had more money put into it than any other state and any other election like that in the country. But if you take this to judicial districts, the potential is that you will get more bang for your buck if you just target a few judicial districts rather than have to target the whole Commonwealth. So you could potentially put money into 2 or 3 districts, put a whole bunch of money to get the candidates that you thought would be more favorable to your position if you were a donor or whatever. And so that's something to consider. It's a real bad idea by a lot of people, they think. There are over 100 plus organizations and labor unions and good government groups, legal organizations that are opposing this and have written letters and op-eds and all kinds of things. The bar associations are opposing this. The Pennsylvania for Modern Courts and Why Courts Matter and a bunch of other judicial and legal organizations are, and the list continues to grow. The League of Women Voters. Now let's talk about merit selection, and not that I'm advocating or Fair Districts is advocating this, but I'm just pointing out there are other ways to go. The League of Women Voters, your league, has been advocating for merit selection since 1949. The Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts have been, they formed in 1988, and they have been advocating for that since then. The bar associations. There have been multiple bills in the House and Senate that have been introduced, and you can see the years that they were, and they were all unsuccessful. And then more recently, the 17, 18, 19, 20 sessions, They passed committees, but they died. This was all merit selection. And now Representative Schemmel has come back with the same bill again and is trying again in the 21-22. These only require simple bills, I believe. But in any event, it is in the House Judiciary Committee as of the 26th of January and is sitting there. So what happens next? The bill could move very quickly in both houses and then go to referendum. However, as Shirley mentioned before, the requirements for advertising these things were bumping up against a real hard stop here. And so it looks like this will not get on, it will not be voted on in time to make the May primary. It has been introduced. It was already introduced in the House on the 11th of January. It went to the Judiciary Committee on the 13th. They had a meeting and they had a vote to hold hearings. Let's stop and take a breath and hold some hearings. And the vote was 15 nay and 10 yay. It was party line. So that didn't go. And then they voted on the bill itself. And it passed 13 to 12. It was a real slim vote because 2 Republicans and all the Democrats voted against it. So it was once again bipartisan opposition. It advanced to the floor and right now it is laid on the table. And as I said, that's where it sits right now. And it will probably not make the May primary, but that does not mean that they cannot bring that off the table and activate it in any time in time for the November election or even go into next year because the session is 2 years. So that's the potential. If it passes this legislation, it goes on the ballot for voter referendum. And I'm going to once again reemphasize what Shirley said. Most bills that go to voter referendum win. The voters assume that their legislators did their due diligence in putting the ballot on the bill. So they figure, okay, and understand, and we are citizens, a lot of people don't have time to get into the weeds on this thing. They just go and into the ballot box and cast a vote. And they assume that it's in their best interest if it's on the ballot. Our legislators did not do diligence on this bill. And they are hoping that we're not going to notice this and people are going to vote. And just like Shirley showed you as far as the Ballotpedia thing, this is the referendum. And I would like you to take a look at this and read through it. And I would like you to pretend that you have heard nothing that I have said for the last 25 minutes or whatever, and read this. And then I'm going to pose a couple of questions to you. So take a second and just read that. And my 2 questions are: 1, is this easy to understand? And 2, how would you vote if you knew nothing on it and this was the first time that you saw it? How would you vote? And obviously they're rhetorical questions, but that's something to think about, because this is what people are going to see on the ballot. This is what you will see if it makes it for referendum. Citizens a contact sport, as we all know, and with that, I lost my screen. Citizens a contact sport. And so some of the things that you can do: call or write or visit your legislators to say, please don't support this bill. Join a local Fair Districts PA group to learn more. And some of you are Fair Districts members already, but there is a tremendous amount of information on the website about gerrymandering and rules reform and certainly this potential amendment. Write a letter to the editor, say we need better legislative rules and we don't need or want judicial districts if you don't agree with it. If you want somebody to come talk to another group that you belong to, certainly ask for a speaker from Fair Districts or sign the petition from Fair Districts. And I will end this part of the presentation with my first picture, and it pretty much says everything. The potential is right there. And here's our gerrymandering beast. Here are our courts. Here is Lady Liberty. And here is our democracy. And they're kind of potentially laying in shambles on the ground. On that, I will thank you for your attention. I'm asking that potentially you just say no to this. And we are now, if anybody has any questions or I am happy to try to answer them, or Shirley or somebody else will. And I will stop my screen share if I can. Come on, stop share. There we are. Okay. So thank you, people, for your attention.
So thanks to Jean, I'm gonna, since I'm monitoring the chat here, just say that there are not any specific questions. I did get a comment from one person saying that there's a lot of detail and a lot of content here. We're expecting to post this to our website at some point here with the recording of this, so that you can share it and take a look at it with your leisure. You know, come to some conclusions yourself about whether this is something that's you know, worthy of your vote or not. I'm not getting, Shirley, I'm not getting any questions. Jean, I'm not getting any questions.
Either I did a great job or I did a terrible job. I
I'm
don't know
raising
which.
my hand. I'm raising my hand. I don't, you
Okay.
actually just,
Go ahead.
you just actually answered the question that I was going to ask, that this presentation is going to be made available generally. That's what you said, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And
There are ways,
I
there are
believe-
ways of raising your hand in the chat.
There are. Well, yeah, you could go down to reactions and actually raise your hand, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm done.
Okay, all right. There's another question here. Is Fair Districts part of Arnold Schwarzenegger's group to end gerrymandering nationwide?
No, we are not. We have approached, we have tried to get on his radar, and he, I think, did give a statement, but we are an entity unto our own. And as I said, we are a child of the League of Women Voters. So, and we are not really affiliated. There are other Fair Districts groups that are called Fair Districts, like Fair District Georgia, I think, and Fair District Virginia, or whatever. There are other ones, and we communicate with them, but we are not in national kind of thing.
Okay, another question. Do you expect a lot of money to be spent on HB 30?
Yes, yes, yes. There's in a number of ways. If they do this, there will be a tremendous amount of money spent from dark money and special interest money poured into the judicial districts, as I kind of mentioned there toward the end. But the other thing that will happen, and Shirley had mentioned this on some of the other amendments that she talked about. If this does pass, there will be court cases that will be filed along the way against this to try to keep it from happening. And obviously that will take up not only taxpayer money because of that side, but it will take up a lot of other money too. So yeah, there's going to be big expenditure on this if it goes.
Another question, what's the best way to advocate against judicial district redistricting if your legislator is fully supportive of it?
My representative is Russ Diamond, so.
Yeah, I know, Patty. I saw you there and I said, oh, yeah, poor Patty. Yeah, you have Russ. Pat, the best way that I can say, Patty, and you know, you've been involved with this for a while. It's the same thing as with the redistricting kind of thing. You're going to have to go to other places, meaning push in on other districts and more the leaders and that kind of thing. You're not going to probably get anywhere with Representative Diamond or Representative Ryan or anybody in your area. And so right now we're concentrating on the state government committee members in the House. And those are people, even though you are not a constituent, certainly you can write to or talk to or call or whatever. The other thing is, and we've had a tremendous response for this, is for letters to the editor and op-eds. And they have, I mean, we have had a ton of them published and they do make a difference. They are really getting a lot of public attention. So that's another way to do it. And then, as I said earlier, I guess, if you have or know of anybody else that needs educated on this thing, get a speaker to talk to the group, or, speak to yourself. But if it does get passed, the public education portion of this is absolutely critical, because as we've said, Shirley and I and everybody else has said, people just assume that if it's on the ballot, people knew what they were doing when they put it there. And that's not the case. And they write these things, in many cases to get the result that they want. And so that's a big piece of it too, is trying to educate the public. So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question, is ALEC involved in this amendment?
We don't know for sure. And so I can't really answer that knowledgeably. I would say that there may be a potential for that, and that's about all I'm gonna say at this point.
Mhm, mhm.
And if I find out any differently, if I find out additional information, I will be happy to get back to the leaders, and then you can give that information out. But right now, it's suspect, but I can't answer that knowledgeably.
Could the redistricting be successfully handled using artificial intelligence?
To a degree. I mean, they have a logarithm, whatever, bad, tough with that. But it can be garbage in, garbage out too. And so you can't totally do it. I mean, a lot of people say, okay, let's just do it mathematically. But there are other issues that need to be kind of addressed when you talk about what's important with this. And this is one of the things that the Committee of 70s Draw the Lines organization. And if anybody's interested in that, it's a great organization. Go to drawthelines.org. And these are mappers. These are our citizen mappers that have been doing this for like 3 or 4 years now. And there are certain things that some people want to consider, whether it be community, if it's of interest, or whether if it's geography, or whether it's whatever. There are some human kinds of things that do need to probably be put into that mix. And it sometimes is very difficult to do that without with strictly a mathematical kind of thing.
Somebody's asking if there are sample letters to the editor that can be amended, and
Yes, there are on the website, and it goes in fairdistrictspa.com. And I think that might be in something that Shirley and Bonnie are putting out in a newsletter or whatever, but fairdistrictspa.com, and you go to the website, and there's like buttons up there, take action and events. And if you scroll through that, they will give you sample letters, or and you can modify them. We will also, if this does go, we will also, well, they're already on there, but there is also letter campaigns that give you sample letters that will come out too. But yes, there are some on the website.
okay. All right. Just so people know, ALEC stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council. And you can go to their website at www.alec.org. But that's, they're yet another group that has, I think, over a considerable period of time tried to flex their particular perspective and muscle on issues.
And redistricting is one of those issues that they have flexed, that we've had several of our legislators go down to their conferences about redistricting and that kind of thing too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any raised hands. Nobody else has come into the chat to put a question.
Oh, just for a second, I think Connie made, I should have said that. ALEC is not a progressive organization. And so when I say we had legislators, I mean that there were legislators from Pennsylvania going down to ALEC. I'm not saying that they were necessary, so yes, they weren't fair districts, supported legislatures necessarily, but there were some from Pennsylvania that went to their conferences about redistricting. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're done here. Shirley, back to you, right?
Okay, I'm ready to talk again. Apparently I'm talking, but I didn't, am I still muted? Okay,
No,
but I'm not.
we can hear you.
Okay, all right.
We hear you.
Everybody else is getting to be a big screen, but I'm not on a big screen. I'm, at least on my screen, I'm not.
Yes,
I'm
you
a
are.
little picture here, but I can still say thank you very much to everyone. To all of you who came this evening, as well as the Carlisle League for being a co-sponsor. Our deep appreciation to Jean Handley for taking us through this. As we did say, we have recorded this and we will be putting it out on our website. When we do have it there, I will send an email to everybody who registered for this event telling you it's there. If you want to direct people to it, or you want to go back because you want to remember something that was covered. In addition, as Jean mentioned, she has sent me a document with information from fair districts that I will include with that email so that we can share it with everybody. It has talking points to consider about House Bill 38. It has some links to various sites. This is one of the things that the League of Women Voters Pennsylvania has taken a position on, and that is in opposition to House Bill 38. And I would point to the fact that fair districts and a number of other groups, Pennsylvania for Modern Courts, the bar associations, and they have made a lot of noise, and that's why it got tabled, or it might be on the May primary. There's been a lot of opposition presented. Although Russ Diamond has been quoted as saying he doesn't listen to people like fair districts and the League of Women Voters. I don't know who he does listen to, but he has been quoted as saying that. But we will continue to try, because we are opposed to this gerrymandering that occurs with districting things. Again, thank you all for being part of this evening. We hope you go away with at least something that you were not aware of before. Don't forget, there are 3 amendments on the ballot in May, and that all registered voters can vote on those. Again, thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Shirley. Thank you, Jean.
Bye.
Thank
Jane.
you so much.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Okay. Where is it? Where is it?
Shirley, do we need to stay on for a second?
Why don't you? Why don't you and May stay on, Bonnie, if you want to stay?
Okay.
Okay.
You can stop the recording now, Shirley.
Oh, I thank you. I forgot about that. Stop the recording.